Hi, Jim Dowdalls, back again for a second video. This video is going to be the fun part of the project, the rendering part. So there's a few steps that we need to do before we get into the rendering, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. The first step after finishing the preliminary sketch is to do a contour line drawing, clean contour line drawing of that sketch. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. So I've got my preliminary sketch that you saw in the last video, the one that I created for the last video. And now what I want to do is I want to put another piece of tracing paper over it. And I again used the Indigo Blue Prismacolor Premier pencil for this. What you want to do is put the tracing paper right on top and then just redraw. But don't just trace what's underneath. Have your reference in front of you, and you need to get all the contours that are there, all the information. No shading, nothing like that, no cast shadows, but all the touchable edges, if you will, of the structure, all the structure. So everything that you're going to transfer, which is not cast shadow, no texture, anything like that, no shading. It's all contour line, okay? So it should be a nice, clean contour line drawing. So you can see it just a little bit better. I took the preliminary drawing out from underneath it, that other tracing layer. So now what we have is the contour line drawing for transferring to Canson paper. Okay, and don't forget to put the registration marks in all four corners so you know what the parameters of your composition are. And I used my red line underneath that was on the white paper to help me with that. So again, this size is 14 by 17. I came in a little bit, about an inch. We're looking for a good composition. If you can bring it in, if you want to bring it in a little bit, don't make it too tight. But you know, I've got plenty of room on the side, on either side, with a little bit more room in the front because that's where the light's hitting, and got plenty of room at the bottom and the top. Okay, so I've got my drawing transferred to the dark gray Canson paper, and I'm going to show you how I did that. But I want to make sure at the very beginning that you know and you remember that there's two different sides to this Canson paper. There's two different textures, and the texture that you want is a smoother texture than the one that I'm going to show you in a minute. This is the one, and I put a little yes. Can you see that? There it is. Because I tested it. Don't try to look at it and see if you can figure out what the side is that you need. You want to do that with your white or black colored pencil. Since this is dark gray paper, I think that white works fine. The other side, I don't know if you can see that, but I think you can. There's little tiny little holes. It's a textural holy texture that's on one side of the paper. I'm not going to call it the incorrect side or the correct side, but for our project, the smoother of the two sides works better. You want to be able to create your own texture on the drawing. You don't want to have that little holy texture dictating what your texture is going to look like. So much better to use that side. Test it. The only way to do it was with a pencil in the very corner of the page. Okay. So I took my contour line drawing, one that I just demonstrated, and you could probably see through it. It looks like a mess, but what I did was I put white Conti crayon. I got a piece of white Conti crayon that I used, and I put it all over the back, and you can hold it up to the light and see that you're covering every line, every contour with the white. I just used the point of it and dragged it across the lines. You can rub it in if you want to, but you don't want to rub it off. You can use a tissue or your finger afterwards. And then the beauty of using the white is that I don't need a separate piece of paper on the back. Not sure if you can see the drawing. I can see it fairly easily, very easily, even it was fairly light. So when you tape it down to your Canson paper, make sure that it's level and squared. You're going to use your compositional marks. Remember, I had the little registration points, 4 corners, that I transferred over to, and I put white Conti underneath those. You can see one of these right there. Okay, so there's white Conti underneath there. Now for the transfer, now remember that white is on the back of the drawing, okay? Make sure you put it on the back of the drawing. For the transfer, I used a Tuscan red color erase pencil. You could use graphite or anything, but I wanted to use a different color than the color that I did the drawing in, so that I could, when I'm transferring it, when I'm redrawing it, I can see my line a lot easier. Okay, so that's a good trick. So white works pretty well. I think you can see that. If it works too well, if it's really strong, you can take a kneaded eraser to it and soften it. You don't want to erase it, but you can totally soften it with a kneaded eraser. I would use a kneaded eraser. I wouldn't use any other kind of eraser on it. But I've got my registration marks in the corners. I've got my drawing transferred. I'm ready to go. One other thing about transfer that you could do, and this is what we've done in the past, is this is another transfer drawing that I did previously. I used black and brown Conti crayon on the back. We've tried colored pencil before. It doesn't work very well. If you put colored pencil on the back of the drawing, it just transfers really, really, really softly, very lightly. So I like either a new pastel, a type of a pastel. New pastel is made by Prismacolor, or Conti crayon works great. So this is a combination of sanguine or a brown, like a sepia, and a black Conti. And then I just put it everywhere on the back of a separate piece of tracing paper. You see that? That's taped to my drawing. You don't want to put your Conti crayon on the back of your drawing like we did with the white. You'll never see it when you turn it right side up, okay? So I've taped a separate sheet of tracing paper on top, and then I'm ready to go with that. And don't forget your registration marks on here too, okay? Tape it in a couple of different places at the top so that as you're transferring, you can check and just make sure that you've transferred well, okay? Now, before getting started on the actual rendering, there's one more thing that I want you to do, and that's to create a value scale. And I've got some examples of value scales on my PDF presentation, which I hope you've already seen or will see. And I'm going to talk fairly quickly about building this value scale up. So I'm going to use 4 colors. The 2 colors that are standard that we're going to use are black and white. Okay, so those are our workhorse colors. The other 2 colors that I've added, and I suggested that you could have ancillary pencils to go with it. The 2 that I chose for the light side and in the opaque side, this is a 30% French gray. Okay, warm gray would have been fine. French gray is a little bit more of a warmer color. And my dark color that I'm going to add to the black is this dark umber. Okay, so dark umber is a workhorse color for a lot of people too. It's not as dark as black, so that you have 2 choices. You don't want to use any kind of color that's close to the mid-value here, which is a little darker than mid-value, of the gray paper. You want to make sure that the color that you use can be seen. One thing that I should suggest that you do is make sure that you're doing your value scale on the right side too. So that's the side that I want. This is the side that I don't want, with the little holes, okay? All right. So I'm going to start with my lighter of the 2 darks. And I'm going to start in the center and work my way to the right, that'll be my dark side. And I want a transition area in here. You can put tape down if you want a nice clean edge. I'm just going to go ahead and go for it. You want very little of any color in this transition central area. Okay. So I'm just doing some modified hatching. You can do hatching, you can do cross hatching, you can do small circular strokes. I'm going to be doing a lot of small circular strokes in the rendering, but for this, because it's going to take less time, and I'm still going to show me what my values look like and my colors, I'm going to build up with hatching. Okay, I'm going to start working with the black on top of it. So the idea was to start in the center, let's call that 50%, and mostly dark umber, and then I'll start black right around here. Get a nice long point on your pencils. It's highly recommend. So now I'm going to adjust a little bit. I'm going to strengthen my dark umber a little bit more. You'll probably be doing that in your project anyway, going back and forth. So let's go to the lighter colors now. So I'm going to start with not the brightest color, but the secondary color, which is the 30% French gray. And I'm going to be just barely putting it on at first, because remember, I want that transition right in the center to be mostly mid-value paper surface, paper value. The paper value is going to be your best friend with this project. That's why we're using dark gray paper for you. So just like I did with dark umber, I'm going to come out with this French gray all the way to the edge. Important thing that I want to bring up is the reason for the transition. You don't want to blend these two colors, or the darks and the lights together, the four colors. You don't want to blend the white and the French gray with the dark umber and the black. You don't want to bring those together. This is still my French gray. I don't want to make it too waxy, because then the white won't work as well as it could or should. And then I'm going to finish it off with white. So you don't want to start with your brightest lights and your darkest darks. You want to work up to it on your rendering, and that's why we're doing the value scale like this both ways. So the last thing that you're going to put down is your burnished lights, whites, and same thing with you when you're working with the darks, which I'm going to do first on my rendering. You're going to save the darkest values for the end. Okay. Now if I'm using the point more, I'm going to get stronger color, stronger value. And if you're hatching, cross hatching, then you're going to build up even stronger color. Until you're just about done, I would avoid doing heavy burnishing. And I'd probably avoid heavy burnishing throughout the project. I don't think you need to do that. Okay, so let's call that my value scale. I can still work on it a little bit more and bring it up a little bit more, but that's basically the idea, okay? I don't want to spend any more time on it. I want to get to the rendering.